So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to do a little bit of review of Republic Book 2, just a little bit. I'm going to flesh out some of the claims in Republic Book 10, which we only started to get to last time we met. And then from there, the rest of the class, we're going to dive into Plato's Symposium. Okay. So I'm gonna just review some of the main points of Book 2, and if anybody has any questions, just feel free to chime in. Okay. Book 2 is, for all intents and purposes, the real beginning of the Republic, because that's where the interlocutors decide on the main task that will consume the bulk of the book. The task is to define justice and specifically prove that it is worthwhile in and of itself. And because Glaucon, one of the speakers, is disturbed by the fact, he believes, that most people do not believe that justice is worthwhile in and of itself, but it is onerous. It's something people feel they should have the reputation for, justice, but in truth, they really want to be unjust. They really want to pursue unjust things. To illustrate that, Plato issues one of a couple myths in the Republic. This is of note, of course, because we were just talking, because the main topic of Book 2 is, well, for our purposes, going to be allegorical tales. So Plato offers us a myth at this point. And what's funny about a myth is they kind of have an air of tradition about them, right? Like when my kids were younger, they used to say to me, tell me a story, and I would make up some shit, and then they would think that was hilarious and go to bed. But what if they said to me, Daddy, tell me a myth? Damn, I'd be stumped. A myth, like, that's a whole other order, right? And of course, the idea of telling someone a myth, it suggests that, oh, this is old and antiquated and traditional. It kind of plays off, something that's very interesting we should understand about the Greek myths and about the stories of Homer, which is, so Homer is credited with writing the Iliad, right? But who knows where that story came from, right? Hesiod, I didn't really talk much about him last week, but he is the Greek writer who ends up collecting the definitive versions of the Greek myths. The point I want to make to you is, the Greek myths and the story, and the Iliad is the story of, the very long drawn out battle between the Greek city-states and Troy, which ends with Troy being destroyed. And for a very long time, archaeologists tried to find Troy. I believe they did find it, right? Somewhere in northwestern Turkey near Istanbul. So what they did is they effectively looked at that myth and they believed that there must have been some kind of historical basis for it. And indeed there was. Well, for many centuries, around 1000 BCE in Greece, ancient Greece, these stories were carried on in an oral tradition. It's really funny. I'm writing about this in an article somewhere, but in one of Plato's other dialogues, he relates a story about the king of Egypt, who the first time he is confronted with a written document, he says, oh my God, this technology is terrible. Think about hearing this about how many times have you heard that cell phones make us mentally weaker, right? Because we outsource certain mental capacities to them, like orientation. Like nowadays, there was an article written in the New York Times that young people and people my generation, anybody who comes to rely on their GPS, they don't really have to think spatially anymore. They don't have to worry about where so-and-so is. They don't have to get a kind of a sense of direction. They just use their GPS. So there's a worry that technology makes us weaker. Well, the story of the king of Egypt is, he says, this writing on papyrus, this newfangled technology, this is bad. And his point is, he says it's going to make people less able to remember. That's his point. Because when these stories were an oral tradition, we had to remember, we had no other choice, right? You can imagine, listen, the Iliad is called an epic poem. You know what that means? It's fucking long. Some guy, some guys, some people back in the past, they had memorized the whole damn thing and they would sit there and tell it all night. Can you imagine? We don't even have a, we can't even pay attention for like 5 minutes anymore. But the point I want to make to you is, as these myths are handed on from person to person through you can imagine how this oral tradition worked, right? One dude would have a pattern of saying it and then would pass it on to another dude. And what would get lost and what would get added? Who knows? Finally, Homer gets his hands on it, writes it down. Everybody's like, done. That's the definitive version, no more. And the same thing happened with the Greek myths. There are all different stories about the Greek myths, variations of them. And then when Hesiod writes them down, these are the definitive versions. So the idea of authorship with myth is really problematic. But I just think it's really funny and interesting that Plato keeps relating these myths. And he just makes them up. Like, there is no documentation that they existed before the Republic. He makes this shit up. There was a myth of Gyges. It's a damn good myth. It's so good that Tolkien writes The Hobbit because he's inspired by it. And we had a nice debate last week about how accurate it is. I tend to think it's pretty damn accurate. But anyway, I've been digressing. Yes, James. Great points. I don't know what the yeah was for, but I like your points.
I was agreeing with you when you touched on it. So
nice. There is a course, my colleague Egluta teaches a course on mythology. I highly recommend you take it. I bet it's really interesting. Hey, Emerald, what's up?
Oh, I just wanted to say that it's really funny that he thought that writing things down would make people lose their ability to remember, when like writing things down actually helps people remember better than just like being told information.
Well, I think the point is, it's an issue in digital technology. We refer to it as kind of outsourcing, right? We outsource, and it's a big debate, right? We outsource certain functions to technology. And some people think we are weaker for it. Of course, what evolutionary biologists will say is, when we can outsource some things, this means we can focus on other things more. And this means we can do other things better. So there's your debate.
I was talking specifically more about when you write something down, like your own self, you remember that knowledge of what you've written down better than just like being told it, because it's like validating the information in your brain when you're writing it down, because you're relaying the information in another way. So it like commits it to memory more.
That's the way I study. That's the way I used to study, just write stuff down. I agree with you. But then also, I'm afraid I'll forget things. So I have a little notepad by my bed and I write notes so that, I won't forget them. Lily, are you raising your hand in the chat? Nope. Okay. All right. Hi. Gyges. Yeah, and we're going to talk about the myth of which is how he ends the book 10. He really got lazy naming the character E-R. Anyway. And look, yeah, and the fact that he ends the Republic with a myth is huge. Anyway, so the challenge is to define justice. And Socrates says, if I'm going to define justice, I need to see it writ large. So we need to see it in a city. This raised a very good question the other day. If you want to see justice, does that mean you have to start from scratch? Does that mean earthly existing cities like Baltimore, poor Baltimore, are fucked, does it mean that justice is only possible in an ideal city, which means we're all fucked? Does it mean we can only hope for degrees of justice? I think that's probably closer to it. And they start laying out this ideal city and they say, it's going to be the richest city. And in order to be the richest, most efficient city, we need division of labor. Division of labor is a very old industrial or economic idea that was hit on in order to, maximize efficiency. Emerald?
This is just more of like a side thing. In the Walters Museum, I'm pretty sure it's the name of the painting, but there's a painting called The Ideal City that I had like written about, and I'm just like wondering where this is going to go in like relation to that painting, if it's related at all.
Find it, see if it's on the Walters website and post it. That would be neat. I don't know. I've been in the Walters in years. But I'm having dinner tonight with one of the art historians at Micah, so I'll ask him. He probably knows. Plato's ideal city was known very well throughout the Middle Ages in Europe. When Machiavelli writes The Prince in the 1400s, he references Plato's Republic. And it's not surprising that the Renaissance, this would have been in vogue, because in the Renaissance, this was a return of interest in Greek and Roman artists. Oh, we got the painting here, huh? Oh, it's that thing. Oh, I've seen that before. Huh. Interesting. Okay. Did you want to say anything about it, Emerald?
Oh, I was going to let you finish before I say anything to see if there's like, correlations and whatnot.
Well, I see the Colosseum in that painting. I think the guy was like looking around ancient Italy and saying, I like this. I like this. I don't know if it reflects Plato's ideal city in particular. Did you want to say anything about it, Emerald?
Oh, I was wanted you to finish, but I was going to say that when I had written about it, I felt like it displayed more of like class and like rigidity versus like, some sort of like how do I express it? Like Baltimore has murals and it's not like a perfectly like clean cut city kind of deal. But like this would be more of a like a Manhattan, but like in Midtown where all the buildings are like big and whatnot are, as opposed to, yeah. I was thinking more was like class related. I don't really fully remember the whole like write up as like the artist's reasonings behind the painting, but yeah.
I'll ask my art historian friend about this, what he thinks, but this strikes me as more Renaissance than authentically Greek inspired. And
oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm not really sure why I say that, because I can't speak art history, but that's my feeling. But thank you, it's really interesting. And so it's called The Ideal City. I'll have to ask about that. Cool. Good. So they set down to spin out the ideal city, which I think is actually kind of an ominous sign, and in so doing, it must have the best division of labor, and the best division of labor is founded on a theory of essentialism. And essentialism is a very common idea in the ancient world, actually globally. I think I mentioned this last week. It's a major topic of the Bhagavad Gita, which is a beautiful dialogue from the Mahabharata in Hindu literature. And essentialism is simply the idea that your nature is that there's no mystery what you should do in life. According to the theory of essentialism, you shouldn't sit there and say, what will I do? According to the theory of essentialism, it is indicated by some combination of social class and nature. That's how it's typically understood historically. According to Plato, it's indicated specifically in your nature, as if your nature easily lines up with that, right? And we discussed last week that, what the nature of a farmer might be, or a cobbler, or, certain professions. And then, of course, the guardians, their nature is actually most evident, because, when people are admitted into the army, you literally have to have a physical test, and you have to measure up, and you have to make it through training camp, which is hell on earth. My cousin is a Marine, and it was very hard. Good. I've seen your comments, James. I think I will be addressing them, just not right away. I'm building up to that point. We discussed also how, the irony about the soldiers is they must be like dogs, faithful to their own, vicious to enemies. And we were talking about how that actually makes sense. Some of you were speaking from your own experience. And if you have to join the military, if you have to go to war, it's very hard to view the other side with empathy. How can you? You're trying to kill them. It's much easier if you view them as evil and inhuman. But we're also looking for something kind of unnatural in a way. We didn't really expand on this point, but Plato gives some kind of clue that he is dubious about the production of guardians when he says they should be like dogs. They shouldn't even be like humans. But it's very difficult and challenging to demand that of people, right? That they be vicious to others and empathetic to their own. The kind of mindset it takes to turn someone into an indiscriminate killer on the battlefield and then come back home and switch it off, that gives rise to a lot of PTSD. This has been recognized in the last 50 years, especially. I was explaining to you how drone pilots, even though they're very remote from the damage they wreak, they have very high case of PTSD because they have to build up some kind of empathy in following their targets throughout the day. So the other issue about raising these guardians, of course, is that the stories that they hear must be especially curated. Some of you in your responses use the word censored, and that's a word that's often used in regard to Plato, so I don't think it's entirely out of place. He says, will we tell them false stories or true stories? We must tell them false stories. So funny way of putting it. Why don't you tell them true stories? I guess by true stories, he means fact over fiction. So the fiction that they relate must not depict the gods, for example, behaving badly. Socrates gives an example of a positive trait that they would like to extract or direct people to is, let's tell them that no citizen has ever hated another, right? And when we tell stories of the gods, don't make them shape-shifting and devious and rapacious, Make them consistent and recognizable and things like that. Predictable. But again, the goal is, we don't want kids to hate one another. And we discussed the merits of this. We were also discussing, more broadly, the kind of stories that have been told children over the centuries. Some of them would seem to have very dubious impact or influence. What seemed like a good idea at the time, we wouldn't dream of telling children today. We were discussing the Grimm brothers. There's a lot of awful stories that the Grimm brothers wrote. We only scratched the surface with Little Red Riding Hood, but I leave it for you to, this could be a good topic for a final research paper, by the way, if you're interested. Rumpelstiltskin and who's the lady who let her hair down from the tower?
Rapunzel.
Thank you.
Rapunzel.
Thank you. I think, well, let me pause there for a second, see if anybody has any questions. I've been Do you have any? I see there's stuff going on in the chat, so if anybody wants to chime in verbally or whatever. Anybody have any questions?
I mean, at least in relation to those stories, I don't remember feeling traumatized from them at all.
Why is that?
Well, a lot of them are a lot more edited than you think. Like Cinderella, for example, involves a lot of like rape and mutilation that isn't even even in the ones that we read when I was little, that all wasn't there.
Which one, Tanya, are you thinking of in particular?
Well, I mean, Little Red Riding Hood, and is that the same one where the kids go, the witch lady puts them in the oven or something?
That's Hansel.
That's Hansel and
Gretel. I mean, yeah, I don't like remember being disturbed by them.
What about Sleeping Beauty?
No.
Well, I also agree with Tanya to an extent, though. Like, I really do think that children are a lot more malleable than you think. Like, they don't take things within context for the most part. Like, I remember watching Nightmare Before Christmas, and like, objectively, that can be a scary movie to some kids. But like, to some kids, it's just, you know, a cartoon.
You're just making me think about how children would like love and like are like fond over like Five Nights at Freddy's. And I'm like, this is a jump scare game. How are y'all not scared
no,
by
I'm
this? Like,
terrified
years
of that.
ago? Huh?
I'm terrified of that. Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
I can't watch it. I watch like Furies sometimes and it scares the shit out of me.
Like
What-
the only thing about it that bothers me is like just the anticipation for the jump scares. But other than that, like I'm not like really like too spooked out by scary things, but like I feel like years ago this would have scared like every child that came across it. But like
Emerald,
I've had
what are
friends
you
and like
talking about?
parents and the kids and they're all just like, yeah, we love
It's a
Five
video
Nights at
game.
Freddy's. And I'm like,
Oh,
yeah. Sorry about that. It's
Yeah.
a game where like part of the plot is that these kids went to this like Chuck E. Cheese-esque place and got taken and got put into the animatronics of these at the place. It's like kidnapping and murder of children, and kids are like, yay! And I'm like, how were they not afraid of this? Even if not for the plot, just like the gameplay.
I mean,
babysat this 5-year-old girl who was obsessed with that game, and it kind of worried me because I feel like little kids don't have the distinction in their heads between like this story is an allegory and clearly a fairy tale and not real, and like this story is real or like meant to be real based on like stuff that happens to actual people.
Hey guys, can you don't forget to use the hand raising option. Someone else was trying to chime in. Who was it? Vanessa, was that you?
yeah, I was doing it for a bit, but not really.
Well, you know, this is all a very old debate in this country. And by old, I mean the last 30, 40 years. I was raised on Tom and Jerry. You guys know Tom and Jerry and Bugs Bunny. You know, with everybody's being blown up with TNT. And I mean, how many times has Roadrunner and the coyote been killed? You know, and there were, you know, it dawned on people after a while, like, oh, you know, hey, maybe kids should not be raised on this stuff. But I mean, I think we can. I think, you know, I'm not. I don't think that Tom and Jerry scarred a generation. I don't. I haven't seen evidence of it.
Well, I would say there is evidence that like if you watch it, you become more aggressive, but it's not like it leads you to these actions. It's just like a slight increase, if at all. But most
Those
people
types of,
aren't. Most people can tell like the difference between reality and fake. What's fake? Because even like kids who are like highly influential as they're, you know, they'll be able to understand like when someone's getting hurt. They just don't understand like the full consequences of this. Is what I was told.
Let me say one thing to Tanya that has occurred to me. Technically speaking, in the Freudian tradition, if you talk about trauma, you don't exactly know when you're traumatized. So sorry to throw a wrench in things there, but you might be traumatized and not even know it. Just a possibility.
I mean, maybe, but there are traumatizing things that I do remember being traumatized by
Good.
as
I
a
agree.
kid.
That's true. I know. I understand. Let me make one other point, and then I see Emerald has her hand up. It did come up last week. We were last class. We were talking about video games, and my last book was about the gun debate. So I did end up writing a bunch about video games and guns and people. The NRA in particular claiming it's the video games, it's not the guns. And psychologists retorted, well, listen, a lot of people play video games and they don't end up perpetrating mass shootings. So I think the upshot of all those studies was, there's something else in our culture here. And I wanted to tie this in what Jordan said, like, maybe like Tom and Jerry, the video games might make some more aggressive, but I think those things are actually more symptomatic of the violence in society than instigators, right? What I mean to say is that, like, the mass shooters, they weren't set off by the video games. They were set off by something else, right? Our broader culture that allows these fucking guns everywhere. And, you have to think more in a more sophisticated fashion about where all the violence comes at us, and there's a lot of philosophers who have written about the many ways in which our culture is violent in more profound ways. And I just wanted to throw that out there. Maybe these stories and these video games, instead of being the instigators of violence, they're symptomatic of it. Emerald.
Okay, so I have now like multiple things to say, but the first thing I was going to say was like jokingly that if anything, WWE has done more direct violent damage to children than any of those cartoons. The amount of times me and my cousins and just kids consistently.
That's the wrestlers, right?
Yeah.
Like
That's
that's
a
just
fair
done more
point.
direct damage than anything.
Mm-hmm.
I had busted lips as a result of it. But then you brought up the thing about whether it's the video games and like the media and stuff that do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I always feel like people are like looking at it the wrong way. Like, no, it's not like that's like a little thing, but it's not like the main thing. It's consistency of seeing that kind of imagery and like whatchamacallit, the culture, like you said, of like why these things exist and why that's normal. It's our culture that has these like issues in it. And like, for example, you said like most of these mass shooters, if not all of them, but a good number of them, especially recently, have been racism charge. And where does the racism come from? Well, I don't know, man. Look at American history. It's been there since the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
And like it's on the internet, it's an exhausting debate, but it's always like, oh, fiction affect reality. And I feel like no one is getting it, honestly. And it's not that the fiction is causing these issues to happen, it's that the consistency of these themes and topics in the media is the issue. No one's going to see someone shooting someone on a TV show and think, oh, maybe I should go do that. Okay, like maybe like one person, but that's not like the reasoning. You know what I mean? It's more of like, for example, military games, like fighting games. They're sponsored by the shooting games like that. They're sponsored by the military. How many times have I seen a Call of Duty game ad that's like connected to the U.S. government? And now they just should have said,
They're
like,
recruiting
oh,
tools.
Call of Duty.
They don't even hide it at all. They're actually recruiting tools. If you go to like recruiting like parties, they'll have like entire like land net play parties and stuff. And they're sponsored by Call of Duty.
Yeah, the U.S. government made an old like esports team for it. And it's just like, bro, this is the point we're trying to make, that I feel like everyone's lost. It's not that the game itself is directly making people do these things, but it's more of the subconscious consistently seeing these things in relation of like, oh, we're going to other countries and killing people and stuff like that. That's normal. War is normal. Like, no, it's not. It's not. And going back to what you're saying about like the warriors and like PTSD and stuff, the government preys on poorer people who are more susceptible to needing money, and that's the thing that gets them into it. It's not necessarily the media itself or like that being a direct cause, but it's more of like the culture as a whole, and then things in the media being consistent issues of it. So like having things that are quote unquote problematic in media aren't the problem, but it's having it being the main thing that's seen, or like the most thing that's seen okay is the problem.
Great.
Or like the lack of discussions about that content within like school or home settings. Like nobody's having discussions with these people. Like for the most part, a lot of these like serial shooters, they end up being people who haven't even been like socialized really at all. Like, and by that fact, they think like their only option is to, you know, end other people. It's, you know, nobody talks to them. Nobody like makes an effort to kind of clarify, you know, reality with other people and children in general. We just assume they know, or we assume they don't, and we restrict it.
Thanks. I'm going to hand it off to Vanessa before I do have some main comment. First of all, Joey, don't forget to raise your hand when you can. We had some people there. About the gun issue, you know, I'm not even sure about the socialization. I mean, I think, you know, you have to realize in America, there are more guns than citizens. There's more guns than people, right? We're swimming in guns. There's no other society on earth that's like us. Even societies at war don't have as many guns as we do. And, you know, when you have all these guns available, it just makes that the likely option for ending disputes. You know, that's my take on the issue after all this time. You know, you have the guns there, you're going to reach for a gun. But I also think that that disputes the idea that that the media plays much influence in it. You know, when you have a gun nearby and you're angry, you'd be more likely to shoot. And if you're racist, you know, that's how you'll deal with your racism. Vanessa.
Yeah, I just wanted to put down, there was this, I don't know if it's like some people who like anime remember that incident with that animation studio where like that
Which one?
it was the fire.
It's Kill Any.
Yeah. And I guess he had major issues, and he didn't use guns, and you know, restrictions on that. And I guess they're also trying to also restrict how much gas you can buy. Just want to put that out there.
Okay.
Did you find out the reason? Did you? Sorry, I apologize. I was gonna ask, did you hear the reason why he did it? Because it was like really interesting. Not like interesting in a good way, but like that's a interesting reason for doing that.
Yeah, I know the issue.
Yeah.
I don't.
For
Can
the
you say?
he wanted to see trains, and the building was blocking the trains that he watched, and so he burned it down to see.
Jesus, I don't know this case. Oof. All right, McShafe, you're up.
I wanted to steer the conversation back to media a little bit. I think there's also a big difference in like the tone that violence is conveyed in. So when you look at like an action movie where the people who are like killed and, you know, violently attacked are like goons for the bad guy, and so like they don't create an empathetic connection with that character at all, and like their life and their pain doesn't matter to the viewer. It's very totally different from like or like, you know, in Tom and Jerry, where people are like hit with a big mallet and flattened and like walk into a rake and then get hit with the other end of the rake and go back and forth, and like you see them being injured in a slapstick way and then they immediately recover. Like that doesn't create empathy for the character in the same way as like a horror story. You know, where it's focusing mostly like on the pain and suffering of the person and like creating an empathetic connection and like making you want to try and somehow prevent that person from experiencing suffering.
Good. Thank you. Good. I see Emerald's comment in the chat here as well. McShafe, if I heard you correctly, you were invoking like tone. And I didn't actually, it was my mistake that I omitted a section of the Republic Book 3 where Plato talks about tone. And I suspect he recognizes the power of tone as opposed to explicit. I mean, one thing, you know, one thing that is remarkable about the blood and gore on TV is that it is not exactly mimicked, right? And when it is mimicked on occasion. And when it is mimicked, it's notable, it's noteworthy. many years ago, there was a movie, I think Bruce Willis was in it, and there was I think it was him, and like a ticket taker in the metro in his little kiosk was set on fire. And then that was copied. That event was actually copied. And I don't remember if it was fatal. And people wrote about that. You know, the fact that that was written about, I think points out that people don't exactly mimic, you know, what they see. So I think we have reason to doubt the power or the influence of the explicit story itself. It's nuances, it's tone, it's something that reflects the culture more broadly that leads to violence. Vanessa, did you want to say something else?
No. I'm fine.
Okay. Good. Yeah, and I, you know, yeah, good. Okay, I think that's all I want to say about the bit on stories and book 2. Let me get into book 10 because the issue of imitation comes up there, and I think that that's a really powerful, really interesting discussion. I mentioned to you all that if you know, to understand it better, what he's saying in book 10, you need to understand the theory of the forms. And put it in the chat, it's usually with a capital F. And you'll need to understand this theory also to make sense of the symposium you're reading for next week. The theory of the forms has to do with Plato's theory, what is called his metaphysical dualism. Metaphysics is a Greek term that means beyond. Physis, meta is beyond nature. And so it means the study of reality. Sounds like a weird term, but what it really means is, you know, what is the study of reality? What is the makeup of reality, or what is real and what is not? And Plato's theory was that the physical world is not. The physical world is the world of change. And as such, it does not have being and it is not real. What is real is the realm of the forms. He was very, this is going to bring back some bad memories to some of you who thought you'd escape this when you came to art school, but there was a guy by the name of Pythagoras who put together the Pythagorean theorem, and maybe you remember that. And he was from Greece, and so he lives around the time of Plato, I think before him. And so in Athens, they were very interested in working out early mathematical theories, and Plato was enamored by mathematics. These, you know, 2 + 2 is always 4. It can't be otherwise. It's eternal, it's immutable, it's universal. And so I think to understand what the nature of the forms, it's like mathematics, it's like mathematical concepts. These are things that are beyond the physical realm that can be reflected in the physical realm, right? I can have 2 eggs in front of me and take 2 more eggs and I got 4. So there you have a physical representation of 2 + 2 = 4. But the forms themselves are enduring and always the same. The big picture of the forms is relatively okay and understandable, and you have to understand it. But I need to warn you that it quickly gets complicated when other philosophers tried to apply it to concrete examples. I don't want to confuse you anymore by getting into those concrete examples. I just want to acknowledge it in case you're like this, you come up with some problems with it. You should and you will. Aristotle, who wrote after Plato only a few years, he pointed out many major problems with the theory of the forms. But the big picture is, the physical world is the world of appearance and change and is not real, and the ideal world is real. And what's in that ideal world? Well, I think we have a couple candidates. We have an ideal of justice. That's what we're constructing mentally, or we're building up to in the Republic. And you can have physical, like cities that try to emulate justice, but will never come quite close to the mark. And then, of course, there was the story of the carpenter, which I'll explain that analogy again. But McShafe, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so from what I'm understanding, both from Book 10 of the Republic and also from the Symposium, the realm of the form can include both the forms of like physical concrete objects like a table or a bed, and then also abstract ideas like love and justice.
Yes, you nailed it. That's exactly it. And since you stated it so eloquently, I'm just going to explain to you one way in which the theory broke down pretty quickly. Early medieval philosophers would sit around for hours and hours debating what constitutes a form for Plato. And one of their big debates is, what is the form for hair? Is it a single hair or is it a head of hair? This is what they were debating. So again, that's why I'm urging you to stick to the big picture. Big picture. What's up there? Justice. You'll see another one in the symposium. That's for next week. There can be, and then yes, as in the example of the carpenter, there can be a form of objects. Like there's a form of a tree. Sorry, table, but also a tree. And when the carpenter builds a table, he has his mind set on that form, which is perfect. And yet he will build a table, and to him, it'll look amazing until someone comes with a ruler and is like, oh, dude, you're off by 1/2 millimeter here. He's like, damn it, not perfect. Nope, not perfect. Never. You can never make the perfect table. And then, of course, you let it sit around for a year, the wood will warp and it won't be straight anymore. And then it'll start to rot and so forth. So the carpenter, that's his analogy for understanding the forms. So when it comes to art, of course, the issue is that the artist is depicting something that is already not real, right? According to Plato, the artist is copying, who paints a table is creating something that is at second removed from reality. That's the proposal. That's what the men say. Okay. I believe Plato's view is actually more nuanced, but that's the proposal in 598E. That's where this comes up. The painter does not deal in truth or reality. And an artist, you all mentioned that you liked his story of the guy holding, if you held a mirror up, what do you create, right? In a way, that's what an artist is. This is one of his complaints against Homer in particular, is that the poet and the painter, the artist can and will depict anything and everything, right? Homer depicts soldiers and generals and sea captains and all different peoples, right? And what this suggests, is that, well, how can an artist know all these things? Well, in order to portray them accurately, there is a kind of deception going on in art, right? He talks about the artist convincing the ignorant masses that this is what a carpenter looks like, or this is what a cobbler, if that's what you're painting, or this is what a general looks like, right? And then the people look and say, oh, wow, that's what a general looks like, the artist knows, or Homer knows what that is. And this leads to the claim that the artist is engaged in deception. The artist is a kind of persuader. And the artist is a dabbler. The artist multitasks. The artist can display a cobbler and a carpenter and a general, and will try to do so convincingly, but doesn't really know each of them exclusively or well, right? So it's really, this makes for a big discussion about what is the nature of the knowledge of the artist? And how will we fit this into this ideal city? Why is it problematic? Think about the artist alongside the other craftspeople, right? What does a carpenter do? We know what a carpenter does. What does a carpenter know? We know what a carpenter knows, and we know what a carpenter does. It's not rocket science. What does a baker know? We know what a baker knows. What does a baker do? We know what a baker does, right? A butcher, a farmer, but then they're stumped when it comes to the artist. They're stumped. I think this might relate to the contemporary criticism of artists, which you have probably heard yourselves being artists, which is that art is either a luxury or it's B, impractical. I'm presuming that sounds familiar to you. Maybe when you said someone, where are you going to college? You're like, I'm going there. They're like, oh. And I have to tell you a secret. You know what other field is viewed as a luxury and a necessity? Philosophy. I was a philosophy major in college, and I cannot tell you how many people told me, oh, that's nice. Must be nice. Get a real job. You know, why don't you do something practical? James.
So I feel like in the context of like commissions or of like paying for art, I feel like people think that it's not a luxury and that you don't need to pay for it, like going into the Louvre. And then people switch once you say, oh, I'm going to college for art. And they're like, oh, it's a luxury. You shouldn't do it. So I feel like it's very flip-floppy what people say about it to suit their needs.
Excellent. Emerald.
I also was going to add on to that point that I don't think people, no one considers like how much effort it is to draw art or to make art of any kind in general, or like, because like how do I express words? Lately, I've been thinking about how to like price other things that I do besides art, and that took me a long time. If we're like take into account how much you pay for materials, how much time does it take to make the artwork, how much you need to live sustainably, and how much art you want to make within that time period, and like putting that all together, it's always like a huge number, and I'm like, this can't be right. But like, no, art is a labor-intensive process that like there's no like proper, I guess, price point the way how society is, or at least I want to say American society, I can't speak for others, is when it comes to the value of art. And that's why like people don't value art as much, and why artists are getting paid pennies basically. And that's something that I've really been like noticing and taking into account lately. And it's just kind of like sickening and exhausting.
Well, you know, this kind of gets to the point, Emerald, that art always has to justify itself, okay? Art always has to justify itself. And the analogy is that philosophy has to as well. I will tell you from my vantage point, we are in contemporary American society is not very tolerant of philosophy. Look no further than the university. You know how many universities are cutting liberal arts classes? Here we get close to the issue. What kind of majors are people signing up for at universities? What kind of departments are actually growing?
Probably, I'm assuming like business, comp sci, or like anything STEM related.
Thank you. You nailed it. It is. It's business and science. Why? Because their practicality is supposedly self-evident. You tell someone you're a philosophy major, they say, oh, that's kind of indulgent, don't you think? And I think art will come under similar criticism, and art is going to have to justify its relevance. Always. Artists have always had to. Okay. Yes, Sunbeam. Good. Anybody else want to chime in?
I was typing it up, but I guess it's best if I just say it now because I won't be able to type it in time. But Micah recently got nominated one of the top schools in America for graphic design. And I have friends who are graphic designers, and seeing like how much work they get and all that stuff. Graphic design is like the only kind of art seen as like useful art, and art worth like value, and like you need to pay someone for it. And I always thought about like coming to art school because everyone's like, oh, you're not going to get a job. It's just like, I can apply these skills in my art to other things. And I think that's also something we don't talk about, how art is more than just a picture sitting on a wall. Art is the music videos you're looking at, the computers you're using, anything you're using, honestly. the designs of buildings and whatnot. It's like so much more than just a picture on a wall. You know what I mean?
Of course. Anybody want to respond to that?
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of other skill sets that you acquire being an artist that people don't realize. It's not just like, oh, we're going and, making pretty pictures or pretty things that are unnecessary. Like it's like critical thinking and like I think someone just wrote in the chat debating and problem solving. Like you get a lot of other skills out of it rather than just like simply making stuff. But I think people in their heads look at it like, well, what are you going to do with that? It's not a necessity. So who's going to pay you for that if it comes to a point where people aren't paying for things other than like bare necessities, like COVID, for example?
Good.
Like I don't think people were going around buying a ton of art during COVID.
No. McShave?
I also want to say at the beginning of the pandemic, one of the things I noticed was a real shifting of what people conceptualized as essential labor. The people who perceive themselves as having the most important jobs were usually like people who worked comfortably at desks or were already able to telecommute to tech jobs and things like that. And their lives weren't really in danger and they were kind of benefiting like the economy as opposed to society itself.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people were saying like, oh, artists, like your job isn't really important. You're not like helping sustain people, like you're not providing food or health or education. But the thing is, we got like a month into complete and total isolation and not being able to talk to anyone, and everyone was just like, the only thing keeping me going right now is like binging Netflix or reading these books or listening to music, and like all of these things that people create, like they bring people together when you're struggling in your personal life or when societies as a whole are struggling. Like art is the thing that sustains those communities and maintains them.
Good. Yeah. Great point. And as you indicated in the chat, McShafe, one of the problems, maybe it's related to your comment or not, but it's hard to monetize what artists do. And I think graphic design is probably one of the exceptions that is more easily monetizable. And that's why those people get jobs. But, I have to clear something up. We see this problem in contemporary academia. The universities think they're in the business of getting you jobs. And that's how they sell themselves. And it's not unreasonable. They're charging you 60 grand a year. They better show up. But I have some news for you. The original mission of the university was not to get jobs. It was to give you a general education. What you do with that general education is entirely separate. Nowadays, we're in a universe where like your major to college is highly utilitarian, like information technology, or like at University of Baltimore, just down the road from us, that a lot of their majors are very utilitarian. One of them is internet security, digital security, right? Whereas the original model of university was based on liberal arts, philosophy, history, literature, right? Politics, where you would as Tanya was talking about, the basic skills, university is supposed to give you certain basic skills that you then take and use in order to be a citizen, right? In our capitalist economy, it's become otherwise. You have to get a job, and who cares about being a goddamn citizen, right? Only 50% of the population votes, so that tells you that people are not being trained to be citizens. They're being trained to be consumers and workers, right? And that's what we do. Anybody else?
No, I wanted to say that I totally agree with that. I think that we have kind of, as a society, gotten away from like the value of apprenticeships and training programs as opposed to going to school. Because I'll tell you right now, like in the military for cybersecurity, like you don't need to go to school for that. Like they teach you everything that you need to know on the job, which is how most of those jobs should work. Like you want to be a cybersecurity specialist, like get a job as a cybersecurity specialist, and then you know your mentor would teach you. Like instead of
Yeah.
having to pay $60,000 a year to go to a school with no guarantee of actually getting a job.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people pointing out that college is an overblown necessity in this country. I think there's many Americans, many in this country who don't need to go to college. You know, I think you guys are a special population. I mean, I'm not including you in this. You know, if you want to extend that, you can do that. But I went to a traditional liberal arts college, and I'm thinking of, you know, some of the jobs that my friends got, and I agree with you. They did not need to go to school to learn enough for what they were doing. Or, you know, of course, if you stick to what I was describing as the earlier vision of the university, which is that everybody should go to school, but don't expect that it is designed for everybody to go to university, but don't expect that it's designed to get you a specific job. It's for moral training. It's for political training, to make you a citizen and a thinker. And you know, they speak about my discipline, philosophy and history and literature. They're part of, if you go to a place like Hopkins, where they have different divisions, we call these the humanities. And what is suggested by the term is that you study the humanities to become human. It's a part of being human, what it learns to be human, to study these things. It's not about being an accountant, you know, or a clerk or CEO. It's about being human. Anybody else? Lily, what country is that? Oh, you're from Venezuela, right? Yeah.
Actually, it's funny you said that because what I took last semester with Mike Sizer on being human,
Yeah.
his class. So it's
We-
exactly what it
He
is.
and I are similar minded, you know, and we think that that's what's important about teaching these subjects. You know, I teach philosophy in an art school. I'm not here to get you a better job. Sorry, I think I will, but that's not my purpose, right? My purpose is to challenge you, you know, because I go back to the issue that art and philosophy have something very important in common. They are the institutions that are critical of society. And any good society worthy of the name has both and gives rise to both. Think about how many totalitarian regimes they quash philosophy and art, right? Because they don't want to deal with the self-reflection. But these things are very important. So yeah, I mean, these kinds of classes are important for you more broadly. Good, thanks. That was some good, nice points there people made. Let me get into this next issue he deals with. This is around line 600. They have a really, really weird conversation about Homer and his knowledge of generalship. This conversation is echoed in another dialogue. I forget which one. I think the Ion. But you know, what does Homer know about generalship? Why does this even come up? Because it seems Athenians were prone to quote, you know, at times of battle, contemplating how to go to war, they quoted Homer. And sure, I think we might be prone to that now. And do politicians, don't they quote Shakespeare, you know? What does Homer know? You know, and Homer, of course, was looked to as giving models of courage. That's the big thing. Today, in your reading, they mentioned the story of Achilles from the Iliad. These were models of courage. And in the generals, he offered a model of how you go to battle. What the hell does Homer know about generalship? And the question they say is, what does Homer know about generalship and whether his work guided anyone to victory? Did his work guide anyone to victory? Which suggested he would know something universal special about war. What is that? And it seems that he doesn't know anything special about war. He knows how to depict what a general looks like, and that's just about it, or how a general talks. Again, this is the nature of the deceit and the persuasion. And then this leads to the point that I think is the most interesting one of all. This looks like it's around 601 CD. The men ask Socrates, how, or Socrates asks them, I think. He says, how should a painter know in order to portray a cobbler accurately? Well, he should know how to make shoes. Okay, and then the bar gets raised. And what if he knows how to portray cobblers extremely well? Well, then he should really just do nothing but cobble. And to do it and to portray them the best, well, he must be the best cobbler. And you know what you have to do in order to become the best cobbler? You don't paint. You do nothing but cobble. The point being, it drives them back into the division of labor from book 2, right? The painter, the artist, is a multitasker who doesn't do any single thing well. And if he's going to do one thing well, then he better do just that. But if he does just that, then guess what? He's not an artist anymore. I'm going to read a quote. This is on line 602A. Therefore, a maker, though associating with and having to listen to the one who knows, has right opinion about whether something he makes is fine or bad, but the one who knows is the user. That's right. Does an imitator have knowledge? Here's the point. Or of whether the things he makes are fine or right through having made use of them, or does he have right opinion about them through having to consort with the one who knows and being told how he has to paint them? Neither. Then an imitator has neither knowledge nor right opinion about whether the things he makes are fine or bad. Knowledge pertains to the knowledge of the carpenter who sees the form, right? The artist doesn't have that because he's not modeling on the form itself. And right opinion, that's the product of experience. And he doesn't have right opinion either because the artist doesn't have the kind of experience that the cobbler has. So he's not justified in portraying this guy. Then a poetic imitator, he says down below, is an accomplished fellow when it comes to wisdom about the subject of poetry. Hardly. Nonetheless, he'll go on imitating even though he doesn't know the good or bad qualities of anything. But what he'll imitate, it seems, is what appears fine or beautiful to the majority who know nothing. It seems then that we're fairly well agreed that an imitator has no worthwhile knowledge of the things he imitates, that imitation is a kind of game and not something to be taken seriously, and that all the tragic poets, whether they write in iambics or hexameters, are as imitative as they could possibly be. So some of you were interested in pushing back on that. So this is your time to shine. Tell me how what you do is not imitation.
I mean, I don't. I mean, I guess it is a form of imitation. You draw a copy of what you see, but my deal is that I don't know why the Greeks or Plato really wanted to look down on the arts in that kind of way. I don't know, it felt like he was almost like, haha, you like to copy things, therefore you're inferior. Why don't you talk about like, why don't you have an existential crisis instead, like me? Which, I don't like that part, but I can't necessarily deny that art is a form of imitation. It's just, some comments have also said that, like, yeah, Plato's right. When an artist paints a table, they're only capturing one perspective of the table, but that perspective is still just as equally valuable as like recreating the table, like what a carpenter would do.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna hand it off to James, but I put a question in the chat for you all to chew on. If art is, or if it involves imitation, fine, but what is the value of that? James?
So I have an answer for that actually, which is rare in philosophy. Human perspective. Us as humans are obsessed with each other, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I feel like the human perspective can be only be so exemplified through art. And because art is, in my opinion, the way we see the world and the way we see people. And I feel like that is inherently valuable because it's learning about each other, and it's better to have art because we learn about each other's experiences and each other's point of view, and we develop a sort of understanding and maybe even a little bit of empathy from that.
Thank you. I'm putting your suggestion in the chat. Abby.
I think I have like two sort of points relating to this topic. First of all, I think that from the way he was describing it, he seemed very focused on like, which I know it's a common perspective in like the Greek times, but he seemed very focused on representative art,
Yes.
which of course is not the only art that exists. He was very focused on like drawing a table, like to draw a table. It's not taking into account it's like art that like for example, like a comic or something isn't purely representative art. It's going to be most of the time stylized in some way. It's going to be like an interpretation rather than a direct.
Oh, you're on mute, Abby.
Sorry, I did not do that. So I think that's like a different perspective than what he's offering. But I think even as far as imitation goes, there's ways that artists do that don't like, I guess, fit his perspective of what would be imitative. Like when he was talking about like art, like a drawing of a table isn't valuable because it depicts only one angle of the table. It can't depict the whole form. What that made me think of was, I'll put it in the chat. I don't know if you know the British artist David Hockney.
Yeah.
And the way, I think he's done several of these drawings of chairs where he's like drawn from like multiple angles of the chair. He's like gone around it and drawn from different perspectives. So the end result isn't something that like looks very much like a chair from one angle, but it incorporates like various perspectives of the same object. And it makes me wonder what Plato would have said about this.
Abby, what's the value in doing that?
Hmm?
What do you think is the value in doing that?
I think that in like this specific sort of way of like seeking to capture different perspectives of the same object, I think it's almost like a commentary on objectivity itself. It's like, is this the most, like the closest you can get in like a two-dimensional drawing to a three-dimensional form? Is this still like influenced by or like limited by what the human eye can see? Is this just straight like imitation, or is this also a form of interpretation? I would have been curious to see what Plato would have said about something.
I
like
love
this.
what you just said, Abby, and I just want to say to McShafe, how is that monetizable? What she just said was wonderful and profound, but that's not monetizable. You can't go to an art dealer and say, sell this because I'm capturing objectivity, right? But I accept what you said, Abby. I think that was wonderful. I think that was really great. But all I'm trying to say is like how an artist might justify what they're doing, the kind, why imitate, if imitation is part of it, and certainly seems to be some part of it. Why am I doing it? artists may say different things. What Abby said is one justification, but it's not the kind of justification that the guy on the corner of the street is going to accept. You know what I mean? Like when a carpenter justifies why he's building a house, everybody accepts that. But Abby's argument, which I think is a very good argument, is not going to be widely accepted, perhaps. McShafe.
I will get to and address your point. I spoke earlier about how horror movies evoke emotion. I'm going to cite one of my favorite art historians from the 1860s who spoke at length on modernity, Charles Baudelaire, and his famous essay, The Painter of Modern Life. He spoke about how the problem of the artist's great capacity of feeling is that, you know, you can feel great joys from observation, but also great sorrows.
Yeah.
And, you know, and in capturing that in work, you can make other people feel those same things. And like the need for artists and culture, he argued that like it connects you more directly to the world of the form than by looking at the objects themselves that like the carpenter might make.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when the artist depicts their idealized version of the form of something, you know, it might not look exactly like when you're looking at the chair or a photo of the chair, but they're creating something that's greater than the sum of its parts. It's like the true essence to that person of what it means to be a chair.
Awesome. Love it. Joey.
I think this might end up just kind of echoing what McSheath just said, but I was thinking like the value for artists and imitators in this like society that they're talking about would be demonstration, you know, like they would still need someone to show the people what a leader looks like, you know, like they'd still need someone to show people what an army looks like, you know. So I think they kind of like already explained their own in the writing itself, like it explains why they're needed.
But see,
yeah, I'm sorry.
No, you just right. That's just such a great point. You finish it, Joey.
Oh, no, I'm just saying, I think that they already answered the question in the text. Is like, you know, when they say like, you know, all they can do is show people what a general looks like or a table looks like. Well, people still need to see that. Like, you know, they really do. Otherwise, they don't know.
Well, here's the thing. I love your point, Joey. And let me say this point. Okay. Plato doesn't really think art is about imitation, or that's not all it is. Okay. Sunbeam is right. There is some element of art that it always involves imitation, but do not be mistaken into thinking he thinks that's all that it is. And in a way, that's kind of that's his challenge. Plato is an asshole, just like Socrates, and they're trying to challenge the reader. And the challenge here is, oh, all you do is imitation. No, fuck you. Of course, it's not only imitation. That's a part of it. And then as I've been pushing the other agenda, which is justify your imitation. How does this fit, right? And here's the point, and I like what Joey said. What artists do, my view on Plato is that his criticism of art actually reveals another agenda, which is that he recognizes the power of art. Art always has a political purpose, both for and against the regime in question. Totalitarian regimes, they would like to censor and control art because of what Joey says, because art will always be of political use in relaying the value of a soldier or an army or a general. And art can rally the people and stoke the emotions. There's nothing like art that can do that, nothing other than art that can do that quite so well. And Plato recognizes that. And here's the other thing I want to say. There's another reason artists are never just imitators, right? The example from the beginning of book 10, where he takes the mirror and just reflects everything, that is not what artists do, right? You don't just reflect shit. It is reflected in a very specific perspectival way. So artists are troublesome in that way. As Joey was saying, if the regime is going to hire an artist to depict a general, well, that artist is going to do it through a certain lens. He's not just going to be like, tap a picture and be like, here you go. And as we see when we get to Susan Sontag, even just snapping a picture isn't as objective as it seems. There is no objective art form that just presents things the way they are. No, they're always presented in a way with the influence of the artist, conveying them along the way. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Hope.
Yeah.
Let me take it to this next one here. I want to show you something. I'll switch to Symposium in about 5 minutes. So when I was giving my PowerPoint presentation on Plato and the Arts the other night, and it went very well, thank you. Here is Van Gogh. I showed this. This is Van Gogh's painting of his bedroom. I think I showed this to you guys the other day, but again, like, if you'd said to Van Gogh, are you imitating your room? He would look at you like confused, like, what do you mean imitating my room? He's not just a mirror, right? I can guarantee you the bed wasn't that orange looking in his real room. And the walls were not that blue. And the person, so what is the point? What is he trying to do? The artist never makes it terribly clear. Abby was really eloquent earlier, but when we get to Kant, you'll see like the philosophers, their conviction is that artists actually have a hard time explaining why it is what they do, or we have a hard time understanding or accepting exactly what they do, right? And I think, you know, you can look at this painting of Van Gogh in his room and say, first of all, why did you paint your room? Secondly, why'd you do it this way? Thirdly, what's the purpose, right? And I don't know what Van Gogh would say because it's been ages since I took my art history, but I did remember Cézanne. And Cézanne, he went down to the south of France and he said that he just had to capture and convey the colors. I just remember that quote from him, right? He felt this urge. And it's not exactly an easily monetizable urge. It is now because his paintings are worth fucking millions. But at the time, it wasn't easily monetizable. Cézanne, what do you want to do with your life? I want to go express and capture colors. What the fuck are you talking about, right? It's an urge. Artists have an urge that make them quite different and unique, and they don't really fit in. But this will be a recurring theme throughout. All right, let me talk about something else. Y'all know Robert De Niro? When I was your age, I did theater in college. That was my art form, and he was my idol, and I loved Robert De Niro. And the reason I love Robert De Niro is because he was an example of what's called method acting. You guys know what method acting is? What's method acting?
So method acting is basically when you get so into the character that you act like them after the camera's off, which some notable actors like Jared Leto actually did this, and most of the Jokers actually did this, where they acted like the Joker off of the camera, which was not great for the people around them.
Yeah. A famous example, Jim Carrey, he did a movie called Man in the Moon, where he depicted the comedian Andy Kaufman, and apparently he really transported himself into that character for like a year.
Did you watch the documentary about it?
Not yet, no.
Oh, it's so good. You find like you can just see everybody's like soul dying inside of their body as he's walking around set pretending to be Andy. He apparently just annoyed even the director.
Well, I think Plato might say it's worse than annoyance. Let's talk about De Niro here for a second. So De Niro, I mean, he's a fucking embarrassment now. But once upon a time, he was like a very respected actor back in the 70s. And he was a very brave and courageous actor. And this is a movie of Scorsese that I have a picture of here in New York, New York. It's not a very well-known movie where he plays a saxophone player. Being a method actor, De Niro learned how to play the saxophone, right? So Plato's question would be, oh, you're imitating, are you? Well, let's see. And then in the movie, he plays a top saxophone player. And on screen, when you're watching, it's certain the reason he learned saxophone is that he could play the notes effectively on the camera. Okay, thank you, Robert. Now let's take away your band and you sit out there and give me a solo, and you better sound like fucking Charlie Parker. And he wouldn't be able to do it. So you know what that means? De Niro was a sham. He was an imitator. He was a deceiver. He was doing exactly what Plato said, right? Here's another example. This is Dustin Hoffman from a movie called Marathon Man. Has anybody seen the movie Marathon Man? Okay, do yourselves a favor and see Marathon Man from the 1970s. It's him and Laurence Olivier. And Laurence Olivier is a classically trained Shakespearean actor. And Laurence Olivier plays a Nazi dentist. Sounds good, right? And he tortures poor old Dustin by, this is not going to sound very scary to you all, but he effectively kills his tooth. And by the end of the movie, Dustin has a dead tooth. But my mother, who grew up without dental care, tells me that would have been torture, absolutely, that kind of pain. So in any case, Dustin Hoffman, he uses method acting. And there's a famous story that Dustin's character at one point was supposedly awake for 3 days. So what did Dustin do in order to portray it effectively and accurately? He stayed up for 3 days. And he shows up on the set and he has a conversation with Laurence Olivier, and Laurence Olivier finds out he's been awake for 3 days. And Laurence Olivier says to Dustin, "Dear boy, why don't you just act?" Which is a suggestion that imitation is not the sum total of acting. This is a possibility for one of you guys for a research paper. You could tie in Jared Leto and Jim Carrey, but why isn't method acting art? There's something wrong there. I think Plato would endorse. I think he does endorse that proposition, and I leave it for you all to think about why that is. My view is, when it comes to acting, because that's the art form I know best, the best actors are the ones you see their personality in it. You know that they're there. That, they don't necessarily disappear into their character. Why, anyway, I'll leave it there for now. I have one last thing to say about book 10, but does anybody have any questions?
Oh, I was just wondering about the in the symposium, what was up with Socrates standing on another guy's porch for most of the dinner and then coming in? Like, what was that about? Is that like an important thing?
That was confusing.
That's what Andrea says below.
Mm-hmm.
He's a very impractical person. Kind of ties in themes we were discussing about, what do philosophy and artists have in common? They're impractical. Socrates, the philosopher, did not have good social manners or good social graces. He's always up in his head. Before Socrates, there was a very well-known Greek philosopher by the name of Diogenes. He wasn't Diogenes never wrote anything. He was more a character who exemplified philosophy. And you might have heard about him. He lived in an upturned, like an amphora these are the jugs that carried wine. He lived in an upturned amphora in the Agora in Athens, and he didn't wear clothes because he didn't believe in what was conventional. And he would do his bathroom business right in the street. He was also known for masturbating on the town square because he didn't care what people thought of him. And when Alexander the Great came to see him, he says to Alexander the Great, "You're in my sunlight. Can you move?" There's also one story about Diogenes. He was so busy thinking, he walked along the street and he fell into a ditch. And that's the philosopher. The philosopher is living in a different world. impractical. Okay, so Shar is championing the bit to get to the symposium. Let me say one last word about the Republic, and then we're out. I just have to. Oh, Joey.
So I just have a really quick question about that. So would that insinuate that like Socrates is kind of like playing the part of the philosopher in like sitting on the porch, like Plato is just trying to like reinforce his like philosopherness?
Yeah.
Well, it was another person's porch. Like he just wandered over to the next
Right,
the
yes,
next door
some
neighbor's
random
porch.
person's porch.
Yeah, I mean, Plato
So
plays
it's just supposed to be like character display.
Plato plays up the character of Socrates as someone who is like an outsider and a kind of an alien, in society. He doesn't get on with the machine, with the economic machine, which is another reason it's so ironic that he would be singing the praises of division of labor, because he never fit in at all, ever. In fact, in his defense statement, when he was put to death, he was criticizing how the Athenians, all they cared about was money and work. Good. Last point. Let me hit on this last point about book 10, the myth of I mostly want to just point out that he feels the need to end the Republic with a myth. Again, this reveals, I think, to us the importance of art in his view. So I think we should take all of his criticism of art with a grain of salt. In the end, he understands the power of art and the power of art to reach most people. This is getting to a point Joey made earlier. Philosophy doesn't really reach most people, but art does. And for that reason, it is extremely powerful, and it's a weapon that has to be taken care of. The myth of is basically, the sum of it is, this guy goes to the afterworld and he sees what goes on, and basically people come, and depending after they've died, and depending on how their character was developed in the previous life, that will determine how they choose their next life. So if they had a bad character in their previous life, they will choose something bad in the next life. And so the moral of the story is character training in this life. It's very strange he would end that way. Don't forget the whole purpose was to prove the value of justice in and of itself here, that living justly is worthwhile here and now. Why end it like that? I think one of the reasons is he suspects that most people, that won't be convincing of itself. You're going to need some prospect of an afterworld, as the Christians picked up on. Good. That's all I want to say about the Republic. Does anybody have any last questions about the Republic? Good. Well, so that took longer than I thought, but I just think there's a lot of stuff there. It's very rich. So why don't we dive into the symposium? The symposium, as I mentioned to you, is the drinking party. So I'm going to hand it over to you guys for the beginning here. Sharb indicates to us the curious opening. Let me hear more about how this dialogue opens. What else is peculiar? There's a couple of peculiarities, y'all.
Socrates is wearing shoes.
Okay, I wasn't really thinking that's a peculiarity, but all right.
Well, in the
It's like
context
that.
of the
Go ahead, James.
in the context of the story, they made a specifically thing to say he never wears shoes. And he's
Oh,
wearing shoes here. And I'm like, okay, what's the point?
God,
I think
I've read
that's
this. I read this thing 20 times and I never noticed that. Thank you, Vanessa, for pointing that out to me. Yeah,
No problem.
He can't get a job. He doesn't even wear shoes, right? But he'll wear them for this occasion. Good, thank you, awesome. What else do you notice?
Pluto's late.
Socrates is late, yeah. Mm-hmm. But how about,
Sorry.
it's okay, how about who's telling the story? When did it happen?
not Socrates. Socrates isn't selling the story, right?
It's not.
He's not.
Joey?
Yeah, it's everybody else at the party waiting for Socrates to show up. So it's like the first one we've read so far that doesn't have Socrates being a main player in the dialogue. And also, they're all hungover. And they spent like the first half of the conversation just talking about how we're not going to get hungover again. Yeah.
Good, but even before he arrives at the party, the very introduction, you guys notice who's talking to who and when this happened?
I forgot the names, but it was like a dude was walking back into town and then he met his friend and the friend was like, "Oh, you got to tell me this story." I forgot the names.
And had the other guy been at that party?
No.
No, he had heard it from somebody else. The reason I'm calling this to your attention is, remember, in the Republic, the claim is that his complaint is that art is at several removes from reality. We are getting this tale in the symposium from a guy who heard it from a guy who I can't even remember was at the party himself. And he had heard the story. All these guys had been dead drunk. Okay, just appreciate the irony here that we are getting this at like the third or fourth remove. I just think that's a really interesting parallel. Good, yes. So, but they show up, Socrates finally shows up at the party and they're getting drunk. By the way, they're all lying down. In case you didn't catch this, this is how they had parties back in the day. They would lie down.
Yeah, they're all laying on couches.
They would lay on couches with their head propped up and the food would be in front of them and they would eat and drink. And they drank wine mixed with water, which always made me wonder, how drunk can you get? But anyway, so they had been drunk the night before and they decide they're going to toast love. They're going to toast the god of love. And notice what Socrates says about this topic.
Yeah, I had a question regarding that. He said, like, I didn't understand if he was throwing shade to this lady called the something with D.
Oh, no, I'm not
no.
talking about his story yet. I'm talking about way back at the beginning. He is happy they're going to talk about love.
Because he's well understood of it.
Because it's the only thing he knows.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is really surprising. And that's pretty much a joke on Plato's part. Like, Socrates, this is the only thing he knows. Andrea, just hang on to all this. It was a story, Socrates tells a story of Diotima, but I'm going to deal with that next week. That was not your required reading for today. So hold on to that.
No, but I mean, he said that at the beginning too, because he said like,
Really?
I'm very well understood of that because Diotima taught me, but I didn't know if that was a joke. He was being sarcastic or something else. I made a note, but I can find it.
I forgot he mentioned Diotima. I'm sorry about that. You guys are careful readers than I thought.
Give me a second.
Well, I'm looking at line 177E. And Socrates says, how could I vote no when the only thing I say I understand is the art of love?
Read the footnote.
Oh, it's in the footnote. Oh, it's not in my footnote. I have a different edition than you guys. That's interesting.
Well, he said that, and then he said, a claim Socrates is able to make, though he is otherwise ignorant, because he has been instructed by Diotima. And I don't know if that was shade or something.
And that your editor, I'm not happy with. What you're reading for Wednesday, Socrates' speech talks about Diotima. He's explained his speech about love, tells how he was instructed by a priestess named Diotima.
But yeah.
So that's where you're going to hear about her.
Yeah, and I read about her, and but they don't know if she's real or not. But whatever.
No, again, this is Plato taking, literary liberties. Joey, did you want to say something?
No, I just forgot to put my hand down.
No worries. So again, one thing you should keep in mind, Plato plays fast and loose with the facts. All of these guys in this dialogue, these are historical figures who are contemporaries of Socrates and Plato, but this is not exactly what they said, as if that could ever be reported, right, or recorded. But he puts words in their mouths. In any case, they're going to come up with these different speeches on the topic of love. And why don't we, I want to talk about two in particular today. I want to talk about the speech of Phaedrus, and then I want to talk about the speech by Aristophanes. If anybody has any questions about the speeches of Pausanias and Eriximachus, I'd be happy to talk about them. But in the interest of time, I want to focus on these two. Phaedrus. So let's dive into the speech of Phaedrus. What does Phaedrus have to say in praise of love? He has a pretty stunning recommendation.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. What does Phaedrus say in his speech on love? Phaedrus, I put his name in the chat there. He's the first speech.
He talks about that. Okay, I read that. The lovers, that if everybody was lover, you wouldn't do something that brings shame to the other lovers. So it would be better if an army was composed of lovers, because they always be taking care of each other and do stuff that honors themselves. And if they honor themselves, it serves better for the as a team, not only for them as lover, but it will be better for them as a community. I mean, he doesn't say that, but that's how I interpret it.
Excellent. Sunbeam.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's the guy who said that if we had an army full of everyone who were lovers with each other, they would surely fight to the death and be sort of like not necessarily unstoppable, but very, very fierce, I guess. And the whole reasoning for that was like, oh, you don't want to embarrass yourself in front of your boyfriend. You don't want to run away from battle when he's like right there about to die. You want to jump in and kill the person who's about to kill your boyfriend. And they specifically cited Achilles as the sort of beacon of what would be reflected if they had an army full of lovers. Because after Patroclus was killed by Hector, Achilles jumped in after initially saying he wouldn't fight and then killed Hector, despite the fact that his prophecy stated that he would die if he did that. But then they said that Orpheus was not a real lover because he, instead of like dying for the sake of Eurydice, he tried to go back into Hades he tried to go into Hades, not back, to rescue her. Which I think it's interesting to see how the Greeks viewed these acts of affection and like displays of love.
Good.
It feels like they think that you have to have this dramatic gesture of, literally dying for someone, when in fact Orpheus's love for Eurydice was very real, and I'd argue just as strong as the love Achilles felt for Patroclus.
Good. The question I want you all to think on, and then I'll hand it off to Joey here, is what kind of love is Phaedrus glorifying? What type? What character? Joey?
Heavenly love. He speaks in the beginning about the difference between heavenly and earthly love, and in fact,
no, that's
them.
not Phaedrus. That's Pausanias.
Oh, I thought it was. I'm sorry.
Nope, that's Pausanias.
I think I got the P's mixed up.
No worries. It happens. Do you want to keep going?
No.
There may be some overlap. That's why I'm saying I suspect there is overlap between the two speeches. But James, go ahead.
I believe he's talking about camaraderie love, because when he's talking about the lovers and the soldiers and stuff, I think the implications of that is that it's a kind of love where it doesn't necessarily has to be romantic or sexual. It just has to be a type of bond that can't be broken. And I think that he's talking because yes, you wouldn't do anything when you're with anything shameful with a lover. And I think that the definition of a lover is very fluid in this sense.
Well, take a look at 179E when he talks about Achilles. This is my translation. The honor they give to Achilles is another matter, different from Orpheus.
Oh no, Petroleus and Achilles were totally in love. Like,
I think sorry, so one of you pointed out that Orpheus is kind of dissed, and he is kind of dissed. I'm sorry, James?
Kind of what?
Like disrespected.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So I think necessarily I think his type of love that he's talking about can be romantic and can be sexual, but I also think that in some of the instances, it's more like it can be interpreted because of the language barrier, but also because of the time period at the time.
Okay. Well, about Achilles, he says this 179E, that is, they sent him, that is, the gods sent him to the Isles of the Blessed because he dared to stand by his lover Patroclus and avenge him, even after he had learned from his mother that he would die if he killed Hector. But that if he chose otherwise, he'd go home and end his life as an old man. Instead, he chose to die for Patroclus, and more than that, he did it for a man whose life was already over. So I think that displays immense devotion. That's the kind of love we're talking about here. I was just trying to zero in on your word camaraderie, James, because I think camaraderie can lean towards friendship. And I don't think that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about friendship. But if we're talking about sexual, you're right. That's not clear either. But there is devotion and passion. And
I
that's
agree completely.
And that's what Achilles is showing here. His lover, for all and purposes, is dead. And yet he still fights on and to express his devotion to him. Was that sane of him to do so? Was that practical? No and no. You mean to tell me that's what the gods like? That's the kind of love the gods reward? Wow. That's crazy. Let's go back to the army of lovers. We had a nice talk about the army the other day.
So, yeah, I want to say there is some historical precedent for that army of lovers. In Thebes, there was an army made of entirely of homosexual lovers, and they were actually extraordinarily powerful. They were able to beat back the Spartans in a battle one time. So there is some proof to that theory.
Yeah,
Battle of,
I have a
But-
footnote
of lovers.
in my version about that. Is there a footnote about that in your version, Jordan?
No, not that I saw.
Yeah.
But
So apparently I read that too. Sorry, go ahead, Andrea.
but I had understood that actually what made Spartan army so good, it was like they have a similar system like that. I mean, they worked together for the war so much time that they always went to see their wives to procreate and then go back to their partners and whatever most of the time. So that what actually made it the foundation of the Spartan army, being actually they were their companions and lovers as well.
Let's be very clear. Let's be very clear.
Yes.
What does the army of lovers look like, according to Phaedrus? Tell me exactly what this looks like and how this works, why this works so well.
Okay, so
Anybody, not just you, Andrea, but anybody. But
okay.
you go for it. You go first. You go.
Me?
Yeah, if you want.
I don't know. No, I don't know. I'll pass the torch.
Okay. How does this work, guys? What's Phaedrus's suggestion?
That they would sacrifice themselves for each other, right?
Where are the lovers?
Fighting side by side?
Thank you. See, the reason I'm calling attention to that, Andrea, is because you mentioned the Spartans, they had their wives back at home. That's not the operative example here. The example is the lovers will be walking hand in hand to battle, to fight. And this will be so good. Why?
Yeah, but what? Sorry, I got distracted.
Why will this be so good? Anybody?
Because they make them better in battle, right? What?
I didn't hear you, Andrea. I'm sorry.
I mean, if they fight side by side, they'll. No, I missed your question. Sorry.
My question is, why will this make them such a fierce fighting force?
Because they love each other and they have to protect themselves, want each other. I mean, that's what you do for your lover. You fight for them and they will fight for you and they'll make you the best warrior.
Guys, this is the stupidest idea on creation. How fucking stupid is this?
They're your other half. What?
Can you imagine an army of lovers? Let's get serious, everybody. I know what Jordan said. I know what he said. Let's hang on. hand in hand, arm in arm, kissing each other on the lips. Let's go to battle, honey. And then they charge out. And they're supposed to be a vicious fighting force because they don't want to, oh, I'm not going to lack courage in front of my lover. No?
Because they want to be, they want to chicken out in front of the other.
That's the reasoning.
Oh yeah.
Can anybody think of any drawbacks to an army of lovers?
If someone dies, they will get depressed and I wouldn't fight anymore.
Thank you, Andrea. Other problems with an army of lovers.
It's unrealistic. Like I get what he was trying to say in that, but I think in reality, lovers are typically more compassionate people who are not generally the type of people who want to go out to war and kill people.
Okay.
Regardless of how that makes them look to anyone else.
Anybody? Okay, good. Anybody else? Problems with an army of lovers?
Not everyone's gonna like each other, and that's okay.
What does that mean? Why'd you say that?
It means like we're all different human beings, and you can't have an army of people and everyone know each other and love each other. It's just like, how do you do that? How do you even begin to do that?
Why? Is there something wrong with love that maybe makes it less than reliable? Do you know what I mean? Does love ever make people unpredictable or irrational or, I don't know, violent? Ever?
Often.
How about all the fucking time? Do you really want lovers marching into battle, passionately in love with one another? This is their bond? Okay, listen, what's going on here? In each of these stories, we are offered a truth about love, which what Plato does is the usual thing. He takes his truth and he spins it out to the craziest extent, right? How many times have you heard like people like, oh, love is great. If only people would love each other, they wouldn't fight. But what the hell does that mean? What do you mean by that? What kind of love do you mean? There's a city up the road here from Baltimore. It's called Philadelphia. That means the city of brotherly love. Anybody been to Philadelphia? They don't really love each other.
I'm from there, and they definitely don't.
They are full of shit. That's why I'm glad Baltimore is not called Philadelphia, because that city's a lie. What do you mean if we loved each other, we'd get along? No. And what kind of love do you have in mind? Oh, the most devoted, passionate love, like Achilles for Patroclus. Are you serious? Achilles went on to commit suicide. You can't have soldiers doing that. Sorry. No. It's not practical. Andrea, did you mean something other than tea? You said I'm a fan of this tea.
No, it's because Lydia asked, like, why are you into this? It's like, I really like this tea. I mean, I like these stories and these plots of lovers and stuff.
Oh, thank you. I think it's a great story. McSheaf?
What was I about to say? I was distracted by you learning Ave. I think Phaedrus's concept was you can create like an infinitely regenerating army. You know, like those arguments on Reddit where people are like, oh, who would win? Like 40 normal sized squirrels or like one giant squirrel? It was kind of like that, because he was like, even a very small army consisting of lovers, because when someone dies for their lover, it so pleases the gods that they bring them back to life. He was like, it's an infinite army. If your lover dies and then like you risk your life in battle and sacrifice yourself to save him, then like you both get brought back.
Actually, your comment makes me realize something else, McShafe. The model is that everybody here on the battlefield. I'm looking at 178E. That's where he really gives his example. That's really spells it out, what his ideal. You're talking about pairs of lovers going into battle. Who are they fighting for? Aren't they fighting for each other? That means your army is going to be rather atomized. You'll have one couple here, and they're fighting to the death for their lover. Do they care about the city? Isn't that the preferable ideal? There's no indication, in other words, that this is going to be there's little indication this is going to be an effective fighting force. In fact, there's a very good chance it won't be. Okay. I need to say one point before we move on. What are we talking about here? We're talking about eros. Eros is romantic love or desire. The Greeks had 4 different words for love. We don't. It's weird how we've become so impoverished, right? I say I love my wife, like to say same way I say I love heat in the summer and I love chocolate cake. But guess what? I don't love my wife the same way I love chocolate cake. And if I did, she would kick the shit out of me. We use this word all the time, right? And we use it indiscriminately. The Greeks were very specific. They had different, I'm going to go about 10 minutes over today, guys, just FYI. The Greeks had a couple different words for different types of love. There's eros for romantic love. Philia, as in the city Philadelphia, is actually, yes, it's brotherly love. Also a very strong form of friendship, right? If you've ever had a best friend and you're drunk, you're like my brother, man, or you're like my sister, philia. And then there's also, I forget the word, but there's another term for, I'm getting to agape. There's another term for, the Greeks had another term for the storge. That is maternal love. They recognize a different type of love of the mother, the parent for the child. So you have love, the friendship, erotic, romantic love between love partners, and then you have maternal love, and then there's agape, which the Christians grab onto and then elevate, and that means basically love. We know that now as neighborly love of neighbor, and these are different. This book, I want you to be absolutely clear. This is about eros. This is about romance. What kind of love should soldiers have? I think a modern audience would say, maybe they should just have love of country. Let's leave it at that, But we have to be specific, and we're messy in how we use these terms. And these dialogues make each of these stories kind of pushes the envelope and kind of like exaggerates these issues in each case to point out how we are misguided and how we're using this term incorrectly. Sunbeam.
I was gonna ask about how one of the guys, he cites that there's only 2 kinds of love, but now that I think about it, that's like heavenly love and common love. I'm wondering, now that thinking about it some more, I was just wondering why specifically Eros, and why not Aphrodite, who she's also a god of love. So what's the difference between the 2 of them that makes these guys praise Eros as opposed to her?
Well, I don't know the mythological figures so well, but I would say this. Eros is properly the god of desire, right? Right. Think of the arrows, the god Eros, when he's portrayed by the ancient Greeks, he has an arrow. Aphrodite, I think, is more properly the god of beauty, but I'll leave it at that. I think it's, there probably is a chauvinistic element here, probably, which is, I think you're hinting at. I can't speak to that properly, but I just want to be clear, like, why Eros is important is we're talking about desire and yearning, right? That's going to be crucially important for next week. Let me put this in the chat here. Love makes you do stupid things, okay? I've never been so stupid as when I was in love. Thankfully, I'm not anymore. My wife and I just live together. I'm just kidding. No, just joking. We're great. But when I was trying
You
to,
had me. Oh my God.
I know a lot. I know people like that. No, but when I was trying to woo my wife, and the first time she broke up with me, I'm not going to tell you, but I was very stupid and I did stupid things. And you've probably been in love and you've probably done stupid things, right? So, Phaedrus, is this the type, is this accurate about love? Is this an accurate portrayal? Yes, there's an accurate portrayal here. There's something about love that makes you do stupid things when you're infatuated, right? I mean, think about how Romeo and Juliet is always held up as some pinnacle, like, oh my God, look what they did for love. They fucking killed each other when they didn't know all the facts. Okay? We got a problem here. Be careful, in other words, what you glorify when it comes to love. Okay? Which leads me to the story of Aristophanes, which is the most famous of the stories here in speeches. I'm going to touch on it and then we'll pull it apart on Wednesday. But basically, how does the story of Aristophanes go, y'all?
Is this the guy who said that like there used to be men, women, and then androgynous, and they all had like two sets of everything, and then Zeus decided to cut them up into little bits?
What kind of art form has he created here? Do you know what I mean? What is Aristophanes telling? What does this sound like to you?
It's a myth.
This is a myth. We're getting another myth. And it's a myth about the creation of love, right? And okay, Sunbeam's got us started. Somebody take us a step further. Joey.
You're asking like what was the meaning of this?
Just the story itself for now.
Oh, basically the early humans were all two beings in one. They were like oval or like spherical, and they had they said two sets of everything. Mm-hmm. And then they tried to usurp the gods.
Or they didn't always. James points out androgynous. Some of them were androgynous.
Right. Yeah, but the androgynous ones were just a man and a female.
Yeah.
Together, and the insinuation is that like that's like the heterosexual people.
Oh, sorry.
And then
right, and then the okay, so some were
the other two were
some were women,
people.
Some were men, and some were men, women. Yeah,
so like the men are homosexual when they were split in half, and well, anyways, they tried to usurp the gods, and then they because they were still valuable to the gods because they tended the planet, right? They were like, well, we can split them in half and they'll be even more productive. And then they were like, oh no, all they do
hang on.
is
That's not why they split them in half, Joey. Why did they split them in half?
Oh, they split them in half because they wanted to make them less powerful.
Good. So it's a
yeah, but they also wanted
story. This is a myth. It's a myth about hubris, right? Good. Okay, sorry. Go ahead. So Zeus splits them in half.
Yeah, and then he sends them back down, and then they're like, oh no, all they want to do is try and make themselves whole again. They spend their entire lives trying to make themselves whole. So he's like, well, let's give them something to make them feel satisfied in that attempt. So they switched their organs around to the front so that they weren't cicadas anymore. And then now they have sex, and like the like release or like the finishing act, the orgasm is supposed to be like not a gift, but like kind of like a trick, like, hey, now you feel fulfilled, so you can go on and like till the fields.
Good. Good. Anybody want to add anything? My favorite part of the myth is when Zeus says, all right, I'm going to split them in half because they're too powerful. But if they fuck with me again, what's his threat?
He'll split them in half again so that they hop around on one leg.
That's right. I love that. And then they start writhing around. They don't do any work because they're just trying to be back with their other half, and they're putting arms around each other, and they don't get anything done. And Zeus is like, look at these pathetic bastards. You know what, Apollo? Turn their genitals around. And Apollo's like, done. And then they can have sex, they have them release, and then they can go out to the fields and do some work. That's just awesome.
Sorry, I think there's something else.
Yes, do it.
That point, because Zeus is decided to not killing them but separate them in half is
yes
because he wants the sacrifice.
Yeah.
Because they don't want like no one's going to like admire them or like sacrifice them. Like, and there's a point I heard from others on the internet that if they have like separate the people into two, so they can get like probably double the sacrifice as well.
That's great. Good point. I got it. Well, in the last 5 minutes, let me hear from you all. What is the point of this story? Why does Aristophanes tell this? What does he think this tells us about love?
I think it's him trying to say it's natural, right? Like the wanting to be with another person to complete yourself is a natural.
Good. Anybody else? What does it mean to be in love? How is Aristophanes answering that question? What does it mean to be in love?
I think it is the nature for human beings to trying to get back to their original forms, which is like around two people stuck each other.
And then you do cartwheels. Did we notice that they moved around in cartwheels when they were whole? Okay. Aristophanes, by the way, I mentioned this last week. I forgot to remind you, he's a comic playwright, and he was a great comic playwright, and he was very funny. He's the one who wrote the story about the women of Athens go on strike because the men won't stop warring, and the women will not give them sex. Hilarious. How many lovers are there for you in the universe, according to Aristophanes? How many prospective lovers are there?
Are you meaning like from Aristophanes?
According to this story, how many prospective lovers do you have in the universe?
There's 4 different types.
I mean for you personally. For each person, how many lovers are out there? I'm not talking about gender. I'm talking about, do you have like, how many people can you be in love with? Do you know what I mean? Andrea says your other half. What does that suggest?
That there's one person that compliments you. It was actually what he said on. Well,
There's one person. There's
Yeah.
one person out there. Why don't we call this person a soulmate? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Your lover is your other half. That suggests that there aren't many.
Yeah, actually, he mentioned. Well, I don't know if he mentioned with the exact words, but he talks like it's something that goes far beyond the sexual intercourse, that extra thing. And I'm assuming he's referring to something divine and actually means to the soulmate or something else. You know?
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrea. He does go on to talk like that around line 192 C and D. It is very deep. It's very deep.
It's very, yeah.
And I'm going to end us here because really the conversation with Aristophanes gets so much deeper, and I don't have time. I'm not going to do it justice in 1 minute. So I'm just going to say this. I'm going to pose a couple of tricky questions for you all to think on over the Memorial Day weekend. So when you're at your Memorial Day cookout, this is what you're sitting in the corner thinking about, right? Do you really have a soulmate? Is there only one person out there?
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about your lover being another half, right? What are you, and if your lover is a soulmate, what does that suggest that you're supposed to get from your lover? And can your lover ever deliver that, right? Andrea suggests it's something divine. I would suggest by the language of Plato, and I'll show you on Wednesday, it's existential. That's a lot to demand of a lover.
What do you mean? I know you have to go, but what do you mean something?
I mean, like it solves the problems of life. It is the solution to your problems in life. That is a very high bar. That is very demanding, and that's problematic. So again, what do we see with Aristophanes? We see a very common expression about love that captures some truths, which again is pushed to the extreme, which points out problems in how we view love. In short, what is Plato problematizing here? What's he critiquing? I think he's critiquing this idea of true love, right? This is a problematic idea that I think he's giving us the means to talk about. But I'm going to leave it there because I really want to expand on that discussion, and we'll do that on Wednesday. Okay? All right. I'm going to leave it there for everybody, but if anybody wants to chat, I will stick around. Next Wednesday, I will see you here, 1 o'clock, and you will have read the rest of the symposium. Okay? Have a great long weekend, and I'll stick around if anybody needs to ask me anything or chat. Take care, everybody.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Fern, I just wanted to mention, next week, Wednesday, I'm actually having my second COVID shot.
Okay.
So I'll check the times. I'm definitely going to be late to class at least a little bit because it lined up like right with the start time of class. But I just wanted to let you know.
No problem.
All right. I'll see you then.
Good luck.
I want to talk after class for a bit.
I just had one quick question. Like for the homework, how long-winded do you want us to be? Like, I know you said like a paragraph, but like, should we like, should give me like a sentence, like what you're expecting?
Well, I want details and examples from
examples
the illustrate what you're saying. I want you to give, I want you to, in short, Jordan, I want these responses to indicate that you've read the reading closely.
Okay, I see.
Fill your eyes with it.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. All right, have a good Memorial weekend.
You too, see ya.
Bye.
I just wanted to ask, because I'm taking the contemporary art, she is doing the schedule, I guess 3 p.m. and after on Mondays and Wednesdays, and then Fridays, her class is also at 1. So am I alternating or just doing yours asynchronously?
Well, Monday, Wednesday, you said she starts at 3.
Right. So it's just Friday.
You're with me Monday, Wednesday, 1 to 3, and then her at 3 o'clock. And then on Fridays, yeah, just follow it synchronously.
With your class and go to hers.
I'm going to record it.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to be sure.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. Chiao?
Yeah, I'm just having a question about the midterm paper because.
Oh my God! Really already?
No. I'm just because we are only going to do the like works about the Plato's, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
All the essay questions are about Plato.
Yeah. So I think I could be like thinking about the starting of it right after we have already like read the what is it like the symposium.
Yes.
And the question is, should we only using the source from the
that we've read?
Yes.
It's yes. And I have written questions for you. So look at the essay questions and they are about the symposium or the Republic. So, but you only use those sources that we've read. You don't use outside sources. You may, but you don't have to.
Okay.
Is it only our own version or could it be a different edition? Because
It's whatever edition you use. But I gave you an edition, right? I gave you both editions on Canvas.
Yeah, I see. Thank you very much.
Sure, see ya.
Yeah.
All right, Vanessa, what's up?
I just wanted